All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining us tonight for the Fenton Street Cycletrack and Fenton Street Maryland 410 intersection project meeting. My name is Matt Johnson, and I am a capital project manager with the Montgomery County Department of Transportation. And we're going to talk about these two projects tonight. I really do appreciate you taking the time this evening to join us. I know you have a lot of things you could be doing this evening, and we appreciate you spending your evening with us. We're going to try and keep the presentation as brief as possible, and then give you as much time as possible to ask questions, which we can answer, and also to give us any comments. Just a few housekeeping things before we get into the presentation. The meeting is being recorded, so if you speak tonight or you turn your camera on, there is the chance that you will have your voice or your likeness recorded, so just be aware that we are recording the meeting. Everyone is muted, and you do not have the ability to unmute yourself. However, during the question and answer and comment period, you can raise your hand and we can unmute you that way. We are asking you to keep your video cameras off to reduce the bandwidth of the meeting so that everyone can participate, so please keep your video cameras off. If you have a question during the presentation that can't wait until the end, I'm not going to be monitoring the chat because I'm giving the presentation. So don't try and chat at me. Instead, chat at Angel Chang. She should appear near the top of your chat list when you have the option to select people. Angel's going to handle those kinds of questions, and if it's something that rises to the level of needing an immediate answer, she can break in and ask the question. Also, later in the meeting, if you don't want to ask your question or make your comment verbally, you can send those to Angel and she can read them out for you. And if you have any technical issues, you can also reach out to Angel that way. So thank you for that. Now, once again, my name is Matt Johnson. I'm the project manager for these projects. On your screen, there is a QR code. I think most of you probably have links to the website from the emails we sent out about this meeting, but in the off chance that you don't have it, you can point your smartphone camera at that QR code, and that will provide a link directly to the project website. And you can also type in the URL that's on the screen there if you want to go to the project website, where we have project newsletters, meeting materials for this meeting, and meeting materials and recordings from previous meetings. Additionally, this presentation has been uploaded to the website, so if you want to look at the slides and on your own computer now, independently of this presentation, you can do that, or tonight after the meeting, or whenever those are now available. So this screen, the QR code and the URL will appear on the next couple slides, and it will appear again at the end, so you don't have to rush to do that if you haven't done it yet. Tonight, we're going to go through this agenda. We're going to talk about the backgrounds of the two projects that are the focus of this meeting. We're then going to start by talking about the Fenton Street Maryland 410 intersection project first, and then we'll talk about the Fenton Street Cycletrack project. We'll talk about next steps, and then we'll get to the question and answer and comment period at the end of the meeting. The purpose of this meeting is to update you on those two projects and also to get your feedback. We would like to get that feedback so that we can make design changes as we go through this process. There's still plenty of time to make changes to these. The plans that you're seeing tonight are not final plans. It's just one iteration within the design process. So let's get into background. We have two projects that are the main focus of this meeting tonight, and they are shown on this map. At the north end in orange, you can see the Fenton Street Cycletrack project. It runs along Fenton Street from Cameron Street in the north down to Gist Avenue in the south. And then in blue, you can see the Fenton Street Maryland 410 intersection project, which runs along Fenton Street from Gist Avenue in the north down to King Street in the south, and for about a half a block in either direction on Maryland 410, which is Burlington Avenue to the west and Philadelphia Avenue to the east of the intersection. I've also labeled a couple of key features here: the Metro, the Safeway, and the Whole Foods, to help get you oriented if you're not familiar with where we are along the map here. There are a couple other related projects that I just want to point out briefly because they are closely related to this project and connect to this project. And starting in the north, in red here, we have the 8787 connector. This piece goes through what used to be the planning department headquarters site, and which is currently a large hole in the ground for a redevelopment project. When that redevelopment project is completed, there will be two buildings, and in between those two buildings, there'll be a pedestrian path and a bike path that go through between those buildings to connect at the north end to Spring Street and Woodland Drive, and at the south end to Planning Place. In purple, you can see the Cameron to Planning Place Bikeway. That piece is a two-way cycle track on the west side of the parking garage there that is currently under construction, and hopefully we'll have it done by the end of the year. We have had some logistical issues related to the COVID-19 pandemic that have delayed the completion of that project, but we are actively in construction now. Then, of course, in orange and blue, we have the two Fenton Street projects, and at the very south end in green, we have the Metropolitan Branch Trail. The completed portion runs along King Street and Fenton Street to the south to the district border, and the dashed line is the part of the Metropolitan Branch Trail and the Capitol Crescent Trail that are in designing and construction respectively. And those projects are all related and do connect to this project. In terms of the phasing for these two projects, well, actually for all the projects, you can see on the map here, we expect the two projects that we're talking about tonight, the Fenton Street Maryland 410 intersection project, we expect that one to be constructed next year in 2022. The Fenton Street project we expect to construct in two phases, broken at Bonifant Street. So the first phase would be the southern portion from Gist Avenue up to Bonifant Street in 2023, and the northern section from Bonifant Street up to Cameron Street in 2024. The Cameron to Planning Place Bikeway, as I said, is currently under construction, almost completed, and the red line there, that 87 connector, we would expect to be done sometime, probably by 2023. It depends on how fast that construction project is completed. So that's kind of what we're thinking about for scheduling. And with that, I'm going to go into a more detailed description of the Fenton Street Maryland 410 intersection project. So this map shows the project design, and I should point out that this project is a little bit more advanced in design. So this one, we're working on the 60% design plans, so we're not quite at a submittal milestone. It's somewhere between 35% and 60% design, but probably closer to like 50 or 55%. I want to point out in this graphic that north is to the right, and the graphic is rotated so that it fits better on the screen, and all of the graphics we're going to see going forward are going to have north to the right side of the screen. So just for your reference, Montgomery College is off to the left, downtown Silver Spring is off to the right, Georgia Avenue is off the screen toward the top and parallel to the top of the image. What you can see here, the main elements of this project are to remove the high-speed right turn ramps at Fenton Street and Maryland 410, provide a better connection to Woodbury Drive, provide a safer and more accessible crossing at Gist Avenue, and also to provide a cycle track along the west side of Fenton Street from Burlington Avenue, Maryland 410, up to Gist Avenue, where it will tie into the Fenton Street project, and a shared use path from Burlington Avenue down to King Street, where it will tie into the existing Metropolitan Branch Trail. I'm going to zoom in here on the Fenton Street Maryland 410 intersection, so you can kind of get a better sense of what the design elements are. I'm going to point out a couple things, and these plans are available on our website, so if you want to look at them in more depth at your leisure, you can do that. The intersection here, we still have the same number of lanes for Fenton Street. Going northbound, we have a left turn lane. We also have a left turn lane going southbound. We have a northbound shared through and right turn lane, and southbound we have a dedicated through lane and a dedicated right turn lane for Fenton Street. There are some changes to Burlington Avenue and Philadelphia Avenue. There will be an exclusive left turn lane for Burlington Avenue traffic going eastbound, turning northbound on Fenton Street, but a shared through right for traffic coming from Burlington Avenue. On the Philadelphia Avenue leg, we do have a dedicated right turn lane. We have a shared through and a left turn. This is not a very common left turn movement, so we're going to have a shared left through and left there. And you can also see we're making this a protected intersection. So we're going to have corner islands on the bikeway side corners, and also have islands for bike lanes on Burlington Avenue. And this, I know these bike lanes don't go very far. They just they start here and they merge with traffic. And this is because there is a master plan separated bike lane on Burlington Avenue that we propose to get constructed in the mid-2020s. And so we don't want to come back and rebuild this intersection again when we add those bike lanes. So this is essentially a provision for those bike lanes that will be added later, so that when those are added, they just tie in here. But for now, you'll simply merge with traffic if you want to bike on the street here. We're also proposing a shared use path connection to Woodbury Drive here. The current connection, there is a connection, but it ends at the right turn ramp, and it's kind of difficult to get around to the corner. So we are proposing a shared use path connection here that will allow cyclists to enter Woodbury Drive and bike in the roadway, and pedestrians can stay on the sidewalk. Additionally, we're proposing to remove a portion of the stub of Philadelphia Avenue on the northwest corner of the intersection. We're not proposing to remove any parking spaces because we're putting parking spaces in the base of the new hammerhead at the end of the roadway. But by removing this piece, we'll sort of connect the two halves of Fenton Street Urban Park, and we do propose to abandon a piece of Philadelphia Avenue here to allow this to become actual park property, and allow the Parks Department to reconfigure this as they would like as part of their any future park development. Additionally, we are proposing stormwater management facilities in the areas that were previously occupied by the right turn ramps, and also in the barrier, the median between the bikeway and the roadway. So this will help us deal with stormwater. Right now, in case you're not familiar with what happens when it rains, that water falls on the roadway where it sometimes collects chemicals like oil drippings from cars and other fluids, other trash, goes into a storm drain catch basin where it then flows into pipes and eventually makes its way to our water courses where it flows out into Sligo Creek in this area, eventually down the river to the Anacostia and the Potomac. So by trying to treat some of that stormwater on site, we reduce the amount of inflow into our streams and also reduce the number of chemicals that are making their way into our water courses. So these are things that are good for the environment, and it's good for us to incorporate those where we have space. This graphic kind of gives leader lines to point out those things that I already pointed out. Since I've already talked about these, I'm going to go ahead and move on, but you can see this slide on the website if you'd like to download it yourself. At the north end of the project, we have Richmond Avenue up here and Gist Avenue here. We are proposing to add a vegetative median along Fenton Street. We also have a floating bus stop here just south of Gist Avenue. The median and the floating bus stop means that you can cross one lane at a time here. You can cross an 11-foot wide northbound lane. You have a refuge where you can wait, another 11-foot southbound lane, and then a refuge where you also have access to the bus stop, and then you can cross the 8-foot wide bike lane. Generally speaking, the Fenton Street Cycletrack will be about 10 feet wide, but at floating bus stops, we narrow it down to 8 feet to reduce the crossing widths for people who are accessing the bus, and also to reduce the speed of cyclists in these areas. So you can see how we're proposing 4 quadrant crosswalks at Gist Avenue, and I'll just point out the leader lines here to point out these different features, which again you can see if you download the presentation from the website. In terms of the anticipated schedule, we started planning for this project back in 2019. An alternative was selected in mid-2020, and we've been in design for a little over a year now. We're very close to the end of design. We've already started the permitting process, and we expect construction to happen starting in mid-2022, mid-next year, so the summer of next year, and wrapping up by the end of 2022. Now, there is a lot of stuff that can be contingent on that, so getting permits from the Maryland State Highway Administration, for example, can be something that could delay us, but we are hopeful that we can get this constructed next year, pending any major unforeseen delays. With that, I'm going to go on to the Fenton Street Cycletrack, which this map here shows you in orange. You can see stretching from Gist Avenue in the south, again, up to Cameron Street in the north. The proposed design for this bikeway is to be a 2-way separated bike lane or a cycle track on the west side of Fenton Street. We are designing it as an intermediate grade facility, which essentially means that it's going to be 3 inches lower than the sidewalk and 3 inches higher than the roadway. But there will be a raised median between the bikeway and the roadway. So even though it's only 3 inches higher than the roadway, there'll still be a 6-inch high curb on the edge of the between the bike lane and the roadway because of the raised median. Generally speaking, there is a planting zone between the bikeway and the sidewalk. That's an existing planting zone that's brick and it has lampposts and street trees and trash cans and bike racks. So that's what I'm talking about. Now the picture in the image here shows a cycletrack in Atlanta. And this is a similar design. The main difference here is that this is not an intermediate grade bikeway, but it has a similar cross section. We have the roadway to the right there. We have a raised median. We then have a 2-way bike facility. We have a furniture zone with some plantings, and then we have the sidewalk in concrete. So that's a similar cross section, and we have a zoomed in view of the plan below that kind of shows that median. There will be parking along Fenton Street as part of this project. There will be a loss of parking, but we are trying to preserve as much parking as possible. Generally speaking, parking is on the east side of the street. There are a few areas where it's on the west side of the street, and one area where we have parking on both sides of the street. But generally speaking, the parking will be located on the east side of the street. The picture here just shows existing parking on Fenton Street, north of Silver Spring Avenue. And the graphic at the bottom shows just a general example of parking on the east side. Those pink areas that you see there are conceptual loading areas, which is my next slide. We are proposing to have loading zones on every block of Fenton Street, and occasionally on the east-west streets west of Fenton Street, additional loading zones on that side. We understand that there are a lot of unique loading needs on Fenton Street that vary from business to business and from block to block. We have been having conversations with business owners on Fenton Street, and we are going to continue to have conversations with business owners going forward. We've talked to over 40 businesses one-on-one on the street, and we're going to continue to do that as we get closer to finishing the design. So right now, we've kind of got some placeholders, which you can see in pink areas on the plans, but they're just placeholders. We don't, they may move. They may be part-time loading zones, they may be full-time loading zones. We haven't determined all that. That's going to be working as we get further along in the design process. But we are working with the business owners to figure out what their needs are. And when I say loading, I don't just mean big delivery trucks like the gasoline tankers that go to the Citgo or the Exxon, or the tractor trailer that goes to the Safeway. I mean things like Metro Access, DoorDash, Uber Eats, Ubers and Lyfts. Those are all examples of loading that happens, and that we want to make sure is accommodated in the corridor. We need to have a place where people can get to the curb. Another thing that we're working on, and I know this is a bikeway project, but this is also a pedestrian safety and access project. So one of the things that we want to do as part of this project is make sure that we are improving accessibility for pedestrians as much as possible. So as part of this project, we're going to improve sidewalk accessibility for people with disabilities by ensuring that there's a pedestrian access route that is well-defined, direct, and free of obstructions. That pedestrian access route is always going to be at least 5 feet wide. It's generally wider, but it will never be less than 5 feet wide. And an example of that, you can see the picture on the right here shows 2nd Avenue in downtown Silver Spring. This is in front of the Fenwick Apartments, just south of Spring Street. And to the left, you have the roadway, and then sort of at the center, we have a brick area, which we call a furniture zone, which has lamp posts, trash cans, and street trees in it. And then we have a nice wide concrete sidewalk. And then again, against the building, we have another brick area to kind of bound the edges of the pedestrian access route. And then we have the building furthest to the right. So the idea here is that if you're a person who has a disability and you're walking or rolling along the street, and even if you don't have a disability, it's a real pain if there's a fire hydrant or a telephone pole or a street light right in the middle of the sidewalk. We don't do drive lanes like that. We don't have the drive lane just suddenly shift 90 degrees because we didn't move something out of the way. So the idea here is that if there's an obstruction in the sidewalk, we'll either move it, or if we can't move it, we will have a gradual transition of the sidewalk around those spaces so that it's easy for people to follow where the sidewalk is. And we'll use contrasting colors like the brick and concrete you see here for people who have low vision to be able to see where the pedestrian access route is versus where the edge spaces are. We've also been piloting the use of tactile graphics as part of this project, and I know it's been a little bit difficult because of the COVID-19 pandemic. We're not having in-person meetings, but if we were having an in-person meeting tonight, there would be a table in the meeting room where we had these tactile graphics set up, where people who have vision disabilities are able to use their hands to feel the graphics. And the image you see here is from an earlier version of these graphics, but the road is textured a certain way, the sidewalk is textured a different way, the vertical curb there is actually a vertical curb, the bike lanes and crosswalks and detectable warning services are all textured. The bottom picture shows someone with low vision using his hands to read one of our graphics. We have developed tactile graphics for this stage of design. So if you're someone who would like to review those tactile graphics, please email me or call me, and we will set up a time to meet with you in person. We may also try and work with the Silver Spring Urban District and Regional Services Center to see if we can have those plans left, maybe in the Civic Building or something like that, or the library if we can. I'm not sure if the libraries have reopened yet or not. But we do want to get them in the community. We can't have an in-person community meeting, but we're happy to meet with you in person or in small groups, or leave these somewhere public where you can experience these if you need that. So please let me know if you would like to have access to those graphics. We have developed them. We do hope that our future meetings in the near future will be able to have in-person meetings again. We are developing tactile graphics for every stage of design as part of this project. Another element that this project is going to incorporate is low vision wayfinding best practices. We conducted earlier this year a study that was funded by the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments to design a toolkit for developing designs for low vision navigation in urban areas. And we're actually working on designs for 2 pilot intersections in downtown Silver Spring that will probably happen before this project happens. But we are investigating how we can incorporate things like detectable guidance surfaces and other treatments like that as part of the Fenton Street project. So you won't see those on the plans that you're looking at today, but we do anticipate incorporating those as we move forward. And this is a graphic that was developed by one of our consultants looking at how the Fenton Street Ellsworth Drive intersection could have those kinds of treatments installed. So the next time we have one of these meetings at 60% design, you may see those elements incorporated into the plans at that time. I did mention there'll be a median between the bikeway and the roadway. Again, the bikeway is generally going to be raised 3 inches above the level of the roadway, which means that at driveway aprons where there are driveways, cars will have to go up a little bit, which will help slow down those turning movements. But there will be a median between the bikeway, and depending on where you are in the corridor, it could be one of 3 different kinds of median. A simple concrete median, like the one pictured here at Spring Street and Colesville Road, is one option, especially when we have on-street parking next to the bike lane. We would need to have a just traditional concrete median there. We also have vegetative medians, like one that I showed in Atlanta earlier, where there might be grass or small plantings in the median. And then another type of treatment could be stormwater management facilities. So we may, like I showed in the Fenton Street Maryland 410 intersection project, there may be some areas where the bikeway median actually serves as a stormwater management area, in which case it would be lower than the road, but there'd be a 6-inch high vertical curb like you're used to, but then it would drop off behind that curb to treat stormwater. And sometimes that may be what we use between the bikeway and the sidewalk. So we are trying to incorporate stormwater management best practices as much as possible within the project area. The picture here is a cycletrack in Oakland, California. I believe it's called Lakeview Drive. And what you can see here is that they narrowed the roadway to put in a bike lane. And between the bikeway and the roadway, they just used planters. But between the bikeway and the sidewalk, they've used a stormwater management treatment. So the water drains from the bikeway, drains from the roadway across the bikeway and from the bikeway into the stormwater management facility there, and also from the sidewalk under the stormwater management facility. And that water can slowly infiltrate instead of running off directly into streams and other drainage structures. We are generally incorporating stormwater, I'm still on the last slide in my head, sorry. We're generally incorporating corner island treatments at most of the intersections along the corridor. Corner islands, also known as protected intersection treatments. There's one pictured here from 2nd Avenue and Spring Street. The ones we're designing won't look exactly like this. We have learned from the 2nd Avenue Spring Street intersection. But these serve, the main purpose of these is to slow down right turning traffic and also to improve visibility of drivers, cyclists, and pedestrians. So everybody can see better and understand more what everyone else is doing in the intersection. So by improving visibility and reducing turning speeds, we reduce the risk of a collision. And if there is a collision, because everyone's moving more slowly, that collision is less likely to be severe or fatal. So this is part of our Vision Zero strategy, and we are incorporating these on this project, generally speaking. One of the things that we've learned from our 2nd Avenue to Spring Street intersection is that the shifts for bicycles were way too abrupt. And so if you look at the plan view at the bottom there, you can see there's a more gradual transition for cyclists into that corner treatment island, so that it becomes a little bit more gradual and more likely that cyclists will be able to use it without having to slow down. They'll still have to slow down, but not too much. One of the problems we have at Spring Street is that people leave the bike lane to go around the corner islands on the roadway side instead of going around the back. So this will help cyclists use that protection that we designed for them. There will be floating bus stops incorporated as part of this project. You can see a picture here of the floating bus stop at 2nd Avenue and Colesville Road, which is, I guess, our most advanced and most recent floating bus stop that we have in the county right now. But the designs for the ones on Fenton Street will be more advanced and will incorporate more features based on conversations that we've had with our Commission on People with Disabilities. So one of the things that will be incorporated with the Fenton Street floating bus stops is they will be co-located with signals, meaning that if you get off the bus or you're getting on the bus and you want to cross either the bike lane or Fenton Street, you can go directly from the floating bus stop to a median refuge where you can wait for the signal. So when the bikes and Fenton Street traffic have a red signal, you'll have a walk sign to cross, and there'll also be an audible indication if you need to push the button and get the audible or the vibro tactile indication. There's also going to be an uncontrolled crosswalk at one end of the floating bus stop. So if you don't want to wait for the signal, you can use that crosswalk. Cyclists are required to yield to pedestrians within the crosswalk. We will have countermeasures. Some of the ones you can already see incorporated in the 2nd Avenue stop that's on the screen, but things like a centerline flex post to make the bikeway feel narrower, actually making the bikeway narrower here. As I said before, the bikeway will be just 8 feet wide instead of 10 feet wide behind the floating bus islands. There will be shelters and railings and lighting on the bus islands themselves, and we will incorporate things like raised crossings and other treatments to help slow down cyclists, in addition to the signalized crossing at one end. These maps show the current southbound bus stops along Fenton Street. They're only showing southbound bus stops because we don't anticipate impacting northbound bus stops. The left image shows the existing southbound bus stops along Fenton Street. And the proposed floating bus stops are on the proposed changes to the bus stops are on the right. You can see, generally speaking, the changes involve converting the bus stops into floating island bus stops. We also have a few that are relocated, and we have one consolidated bus stop. The bus stop at Sligo Avenue and Richmond Avenue are going to be consolidated into one floating bus stop at Gist Avenue, and we are proposing to eliminate the bus stop at Fenton and Cameron, since there's already a bus stop very close at Cameron and Georgia, and also one at Fenton and Colesville on the north side. And that space that's currently occupied by that bus stop is going to be converted into a paratransit loading zone, so that we have a dedicated space for paratransit vehicles to load and unload for the Montgomery Center, which has a lot of medical offices in it and gets a significant number of Metro Access and other types of paratransit trips. There are 9 signalized intersections along the corridor. I'm including the Fenton Street Maryland 410 intersection project as part of that. So there are 9 signalized intersections. 5 of those signals are county signals, 4 of them are state signals. We also have 2 Hawk signals, one at Fenton and Roeder and one at Fenton and Whole Foods, where the equipment has been installed, but it is not yet energized and turned on. But those Hawk signals will be active soon. And we are considering a Hawk signal for the intersection of Fenton Street and Gist Avenue as part of the floating bus stop there as well. We are proposing to use bike signals along the corridor. The bike signals are currently allowed in the United States under what's called an interim approval from the Federal Highway Administration, which basically means that it hasn't been incorporated in the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices yet, the MUTCD, and that process is happening right now. Federal Highway is working on a new edition of the manual. We are proposing to use what's called a request to experiment to kind of modify what's allowed a little bit to make these work better for Fenton Street. We have already had conversations with Federal Highway and State Highway. So if those conversations go well, we do anticipate using bike signals along the corridor. Right now, there's one bike signal in Montgomery County in Silver Spring, located at Colesville Road and 2nd Avenue. We have 4 more where the equipment has been installed and is going to be activated very soon in Bethesda. And we have 2 more that we anticipate being installed in 2022. DC also has several, so bike signals are becoming more common in the region and the county. We're also proposing to have exclusive left turns for northbound traffic on Fenton Street, so that we have left turn protection for cyclists and pedestrians. What that basically means is that if you're going northbound on Fenton and you want to turn left, you'll have a left turn arrow signal, and you can only turn left when that left turn arrow signal is green. And the rest of the time, it will have a red left turn arrow. Whenever cyclists are permitted to go, you'll have a red left turn arrow. So you can only turn left on the green arrow. The image here shows a similar setup in Seattle, although we'll be using mast arms, not span wire. So we'll have the metal pole that the signal is mounted to, not a wire. But you can see on the left, we have a green bike signal, and on the right, we have a left turn arrow that's red. So that drivers can't turn left across the bikeway when cyclists are permitted to go. And that also helps protect pedestrians on that west leg crosswalk. All right, with that kind of goes over all the features, and the map here kind of points out a couple of those. The one thing we haven't talked about is right-of-way acquisition. So I do want to point out that we are currently considering some right-of-way acquisitions. We do not anticipate any displacements. So what I mean by that is we're not tearing any buildings down, we're not widening the street in that sense, but there are some areas where you may be walking down the sidewalk, for example, in front of the Italian Kitchen on the north side of Silver Spring Avenue, on Fenton Street north of Silver Spring Avenue. That sidewalk there is actually mostly not owned by the county. It's mostly private property. It looks like a sidewalk, you can't tell the difference, but we are proposing to acquire that so that the entire pedestrian access route can be within the county right-of-way. We may not buy the fee simple land. We may buy we may just get an easement there. We haven't determined that. But the idea is that the entire pedestrian space needs to be in the county right-of-way, and that's what that means. We are, again, not proposing any displacements. You can see in front of Cafe Le Sac there, which is pictured on the top right corner there. We are proposing to acquire the area where their sidewalk cafe is, but we are not proposing to remove the sidewalk cafe. It would still be permitted to stay. And in fact, when we get down to it, we may not end up not needing to acquire the right-of-way, but the idea is to be conservative here and assume we're going to need to acquire the right-of-way. We can determine later whether or not we have to. But this area just north of Silver Spring Avenue is actually the narrowest part of the right-of-way. The master plan right-of-way is 80 feet wide, which is generally how far apart the buildings are on Fenton Street, but it's only 64 feet wide in this location. So that's what you see there. So if you see a red dashed line next to a blue dashed line, that shows proposed right-of-way acquisition. But again, we're very early in the design process, and that may not actually end up happening. So with that, I'm going to start at the south end of the project. I'm going to work our way through the plans going northbound, and then once we get done with that, we're going to have the question and answer and comment period. So I'm going to go through the plans. Again, these plans are available on our project webpage, which I'm going to display the link for and the QR code for at the end of the presentation. So if you don't have the link, you can click on it. But this shows what the plans are, and we're going to start at the south end at Gist Avenue here. You can see Gist Avenue. You can also see these faint lines here are where the Fenton Street Maryland Fortune Intersection project tie-in. You can see we have a concrete sidewalk with a brick furniture zone. The cycle track on the west side here, we're showing a vegetated median, and then we do have its Lego Avenue, both northbound and southbound left turn lanes. We have protected corner island treatments. We have a two-stage left turn box for cyclists, green markings across the intersections. This is an example of a driveway apron here where there would be a bit of an incline because there's going to be a 3-inch difference. So as you go up, you'll slow down. This also means that the pedestrian sidewalk will be level, so you won't have a slope. If you're in a wheelchair, for example, driveway aprons can be really challenging because the slope can kind of direct your wheelchair toward the street. So because we move that slope back here to the median, that means the sidewalk can be level. So this is an improvement for accessibility along the sidewalk. As we continue further north, you can see a floating bus stop here. We've seen some images of this already in the presentation, but the floating bus island here, the forward end of the bus would have a crosswalk that goes directly across the bikeways, even with the front door of the bus, so you don't have to make any turns on the platform. You can just walk or roll straight off the bus across the bike lane level. But if you want the signal, you can go toward the back of the bus, go down a ramp to the median refuge and wait here. There will be a push button on the island, so you can push the button if you need the audible or vibrotactile signal. The walk signs are automatic in downtown Silver Spring. You don't actually need to push the button, and that will remain the case. But you only need to push the button in order to get the accessible signal. But regardless, you can get off the bus, go here and wait for the walk sign to cross, either across Fenton Street or across the bike lane. And there will be a signal here for bikes to hold bikes in advance of the crosswalk, just like there is for drivers. We can see some right-of-way acquisition here. As I mentioned, no displacements, just acquiring the sidewalk that's within the making sure the sidewalk is entirely within the right-of-way. We have some loading zones, conceptual loading zones here on Silver Spring Avenue and also on Fenton Street. Again, the locations of these have not been fully determined, but we will work those out as part of the design process. Sorry, let me go back one slide. I forgot to mention, this is the one area where we do have parking on both sides of the street. The block between Silver Spring Avenue and Thayer Avenue has the highest density of businesses on the corridor. And so we did get a request to try and provide some parking on the west side of the street here. And so that's something that we've incorporated here by providing some additional parking in this area to serve the businesses like Cafe La Sac and other businesses on the west side of the street here. As we continue north up to Thayer Avenue, you can see another floating bus stop. We're also proposing to add a bus bulb on Thayer Avenue here. This is not a floating bus stop. There won't be a bike lane between the bus bulb and the sidewalk or anything. It's just Route 28, the circulator turns off of Fenton Street at this location. And so we wanted to provide a bus stop that is close to the Safeway for Route 28 patrons. So this bus bulb will provide a waiting area for people on Route 28, and it's very close to the front entrance to Safeway. Again, corner island treatments here at the intersection, and floating bus stop here for the buses that are not Route 28, which turns off. As we continue further north, you can see the Purple Line station, which is under construction at Silver Spring Library. This is one of the locations where the bus stop is before the intersection, and that is to provide a direct connection from the floating bus stop to the Purple Line station at Silver Spring Library. You'll also note that Bonifant Street is shown as one way between Georgia Avenue and Fenton Street. That's part of the Purple Line project. Bonifant Street will be one way going eastbound, not the residential part. The part east of Fenton Street will still be two way, but the block between Georgia Avenue and Fenton Street will be one way eastbound. And so we are showing that because we're assuming that change will happen before this project is constructed. There are two lanes starting just south of the intersection for northbound traffic on Fenton Street to basically provide a queue space for left turns on Duane Avenue. There will be a left turn only lane on Duane Avenue and a shared through right lane going northbound. Once we get up to Wayne Avenue, you can see the Purple Line tracks entering Wayne Avenue here. We have gotten a lot of questions from people who see the plans and say, why is there a little bit of a jog in the bike lane here? This jog in the bike lane is painted onto the roadway. And the idea here is to encourage cyclists to cross the Purple Line tracks at as close to 90 degrees as possible to avoid having their wheels caught in the flange way, or the little depression where the train wheels roll. This intersection, and like all intersections with the Purple Line, will have what are called flangeway fillers. These are the little rubber gaskets that sit inside that depression. And when the train goes over it, it mashes those gaskets down. But when the train's not there, the gaskets pop up and provide a much reduced crash hazard for cyclists and people in other wheeled devices like wheelchairs and walkers. But just to be on the safe side, we are striping the bike lane so that it encourages cyclists to cross closer to 90 degrees. You can see we have a left turn lane again for both directions of traffic for Fenton Street and a shared through right on both sides. We also have a loading zone for the Courtyard Hotel here. They have a lay-by currently. We're not proposing to remove that. It will be reconfigured, but there will be still be a place for the Courtyard to have their hotel guests arrive, and also for their shuttle van to pick people up. But again, you can see we have a concrete sidewalk here. We have a brick furniture zone with street trees in it. We have a vegetative median between the bikeway and the roadway, and then we have the roadway itself. Moving on further down to Ellsworth Drive, we can see another floating bus stop here. We are also proposing bump outs to narrow the roadway here. So these raised areas here would be vegetated and help to guide blind pedestrians to the detectable warning surfaces and the audible pedestrian signals. One of the issues we've heard here from people who are blind or have low vision is that this intersection has a very high ambient noise level, and it's very difficult for them to find the accessible pedestrian signals and hear parallel traffic because of all the noise. So we're trying to use some additional treatments in this area to help guide people with low vision to the appropriate crossing locations. And this bump out also reduces the crossing distance. Immediately beyond the bump out, we start having a 3-lane section to prepare for any queuing traffic during peak hours for Colesville Road. You can also see the new Hawk signal that's shown here. Again, this signal has been installed but is not yet activated at Fenton and Roeder. As we move further north, at the intersection of Colesville Road, you can see we have corner island treatments. We also have one bus stop here that's different than the other floating bus stops on the corridor. This is not a floating bus stop. This is what's called a shared platform stop. We do have one of these in Montgomery County up in Germantown on Middlebrook Road currently. DC has several of these, and they're not super common, but they do exist elsewhere in the United States. They're also very common in Toronto. So this type of bus stop is, you don't actually cross the bike lane and wait between the bike lane and the roadway. You wait on the sidewalk. And when the bus arrives, that is when you cross the bike lane, when the bus is actually present. And cyclists should not pass the bus when it is present. That's the idea behind this bus stop. We don't have room for a full bus island here. And also this bus stop has very low ridership. So we felt that this would be a better solution. We really couldn't eliminate the bus stop because it provides a connection between Route 28 and the buses on Colesville Road. So we did need to maintain the bus stop here, but we didn't have room for a full island. So this is a treatment that we're looking at this intersection. And then finally, at the very north end, this is, and by the way, this is the block where the parking is generally on the west side, not the east side. We do have a dedicated paratransit loading area here just south of Cameron Street. So this is an area where Metro Access or other paratransit services can stop and have a place to unload passengers who are going to medical appointments in the Montgomery Center. But we do have some parking here. We have a step out area along the edge of the parking area, but then some vegetated area behind that. And then finally, we have one more protected intersection up here at Cameron Street, and you can see the kind of roughed in here, you can see the Cameron to Planning Place bikeway, which again is almost complete and will be open by the time this project goes to construction. In terms of the anticipated schedule, we did start the initial traffic study on this project back in 2017. There was a gap, and then we put a pause on that for a little while, but it was restarted in 2019, completed at the end of 2020. An alternative was selected in February of 2021, and then we started the design process in 2021. We are going to have community meetings. We had one at the beginning of the design process. We're having one now at 30%. We'll have initial community meetings at 65% and 90%. And then we expect to complete the design by the end of next year. Permitting work will start sometime next year. And then we expect on phase 1, utility work and construction to happen in 2023, and on phase 2 in 2024. Now that is contingent on getting additional construction funding in the capital budget and getting it in those years. If the money comes in different budget years, it would mean moving the construction work around. We do have some money for construction, but we don't have the full project cost at this time. In terms of construction impacts, I know if you're a business owner or a resident along Fenton Street, you are very aware of the construction that recently happened with the Pepco work. What I can tell you is that the work we're doing is not nearly as disruptive or long as that Pepco work was. Our work is much closer to the surface, and the pictures here show some recent bike lane construction in downtown Bethesda, and we're not going down very far here. This work will take a couple months, but it's not like it's going to be a couple months the whole time right in front of your business. We'll sort of do one phase and move on as we go along. But this work goes pretty quickly and is minimally disruptive. We will also have a county construction inspector on site who can help deal with any issues that come up. We will liberally distribute his phone number around before construction and during construction, so that if you have an issue, you can contact him or me or anyone else at the county who's working on this project, and we can get it resolved as quickly as possible. I'll also give you an example from Bethesda where we needed to install a new driveway apron. So we reached out to a business owner. It was at their loading dock. We reached out and said, we want to do this work on this coming up weekend. Is that okay? And they said, actually, normally Saturdays and Sundays are great for us, but we have a tenant moving in this weekend. So this is not a good weekend for us. So we said, great, we'll move the construction to the next week. And we did, and we worked with the business owner to make sure that we did not disrupt any necessary activities. We're willing to work around businesses, and we will be responsive to those business needs and any residential needs as well, because I know there are some residences directly on the street. With that, some next steps, we can kind of look back on where we have been. We had the design effort started back in May of 2021. We had a community meeting at the beginning of that process back in June of 2021. We're now in December. We're having a 30% design meeting. We are going to go before the planning board for a mandatory referral hearing. That's both for the Fenton Street Cycletrack and also for the Fenton Street Maryland 410 intersection project. We believe that date is going to be January the 27th of next year. That could change. You'll need to keep an eye on the planning board website to make sure that that date doesn't change, and we don't have a time yet, but we believe that that date is going to be January 27th. We will have another community meeting after 65% design, probably in the summer of 2022 for the Fenton Street Cycletrack, and another community meeting at 90% design toward the end of 2022, probably about a year from now. And both of those will have opportunities for you to give us comment and feedback on the design plans. And again, we are shooting for construction on phase 1 in 2023 and phase 2 in 2024 for the Fenton Street project, and for 2022 for the Fenton Street Maryland 410 intersection project. So with that, I'm going to go to the question and answer and comment period. The project webpage is linked here, and that this slide is going to remain on the screen for the remainder of the meeting, so you can type in that URL or scan the QR code going forward. If you have any questions or comments, now is a good time to raise your hand. You do not have the ability to unmute yourself, but we can unmute you when you raise your hand. I would ask that you please keep your comments as brief as possible. We do have quite a number of people here. We have almost 70 people who are in the meeting today, so we want to make sure everyone has a chance to give their comments. So please try and keep your comments to 2 to 3 minutes maximum. And if you're going to ask a multi-part question or have a multi-part comment, please make sure you let us know before you stop talking, because we might mute you, and we don't want you to miss the second part of your comment or question. If you have any difficulty in unmuting yourself or talking, just keep your hand up. We may have to skip you and come back to you, but we will try and work out any issues. And again, you can message Angel Chang with any kind of issues you're having. My contact information is on the screen, and it's also on the website. If you want to submit comments, email is preferred. My mailing address is available on the website if you want to send in a written comment. We are going to keep the comment period open, the record open through January the 14th, which will give us enough time to compile those comments in advance of the planning board hearing. So please get those comments in by January 14th, but the sooner the better, because we can start incorporating your comments into the changes. So with that, I am going to call on Lauren Dutton. Let me ask you to unmute yourself, Lauren, and you may have to click a button that says you are willing to unmute yourself. Go ahead.
Sorry, this is actually her husband, Adam, but I have one quick comment and one question. For a long time, there's a fairly high amount of ridiculous parking shenanigans on the entirety of Fenton Street, and it strikes me that it may be beneficial to work with the parking authority or the police in order to educate drivers in terms of not blocking things like the bike access points or the loading zones. The question I had is parts of that area, in particular the Philadelphia Fenton Street intersection, when it snows, pedestrian access can get completely blocked off with snowbanks. I'm curious if you guys have considered where essentially are the bike lanes going to become the snow depositories, or how does that work in those events?
Thank you, Adam. Those are good questions and comments. I will say that in an urban area like Silver Spring or Bethesda, we do frequently have parking issues, and that's one of the reasons that we're focusing so strongly on providing loading zones, because that loading activity is going to happen regardless of what we do. So we want to provide a space for that to happen. We may not get it perfect. We may have to make adjustments once we get it installed, but we are going to monitor that, and we will work with the parking lot district to make sure that enforcement is happening in a way that encourages people to behave correctly. In terms of snow removal, in minor snow events, our highway services team and its contractors and also the urban district can work to clear some of the snow. In more major snow events, like if we have a blizzard or a foot of snow, there's nowhere for that snow to go anyway. So what we typically do is we truck that snow out of Silver Spring. We do have to plow it out of the roads, but we eventually collect it in dump trucks and take it to places to melt. So the bike lanes may be obstructed early on in the snow plowing process, but they will be cleared eventually. Hopefully not too far into the snow event. We don't have a lot of bike facilities yet, so I'm not sure how much specialized equipment we have. But as we get more and more bike lanes, we are getting better at having the equipment and having the personnel to keep them clean of snow. And so hopefully that's something that we will master very quickly as part of the Fenton Street project. But there may be some growing pains. We installed the 2nd Avenue bike lanes back in 2019, and I'm going to cross my fingers, but we haven't had any major snow events since that bike lane was installed. But we of course do want to make sure that those are accessible and usable as soon as possible after a snow event.
Thank you very much, and I support your projects.
Thanks. And if you don't mind muting yourself again, we'll go ahead and move on to Peter Gray. I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself, Peter.
Hey, Matt. So I'm wondering, I put this in the chat for Angel. I'm wondering how much additional funding is going to be needed to complete the project that isn't already allocated in the last CIP that was passed? And I'll leave it at that. I did have another question.
Yeah, that's a good question, Peter. My understanding, and I haven't looked at the county executive's budget proposal, but I believe the money is in the county executive's budget proposal to the council. So we're in a budget cycle now. The county council will adopt a budget by May of next year. And that will become the budget for the capital budget for the next 6 years. So I believe the funding has been proposed by the executive. And so assuming the council doesn't remove that money or shift that money around, that's the schedule that we're showing. So right now, the CIP that we're operating under was adopted a year and a half ago. It does not have enough money. I think we're about $2 or $3 million short, I believe. I have to look at the numbers, but I haven't refreshed myself on the budget recently. But we expect that money to happen. We're not too worried about it, but it's not in the budget until it's in the budget. So that's why I mentioned that it is contingent on the
and is that additional monies for which fiscal years?
It would be in fiscal 23. I'm sorry. I have to convert calendar years to so for construction in 2023, that would be the fiscal year that would start on July 1st, 2023, which would be, I'm sorry, for the fiscal year, yeah, so that would be, I believe, fiscal 24 and 25 is when we would actually need the money to be available, I believe.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. And I'm going to lower if you don't mind lowering your hand, Peter, I'm going to call on Allison Gillespie. I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself, Allison, and whenever you are able, you can go ahead and speak.
Thanks, Matt. I really appreciate the work you all have put into this. I especially am really glad to see the proposed changes to the 410 intersection, and I think those will be really, really good, and they're very needed. I also really would love to see the planters used as buffers that you showed from Oakland, California. I think that could go a long way to making this whole area a lot better for many, many reasons. I had a question though. In slides 35 and 40, there were pink sections. When you were talking about slide number 40, the pink sections were in parking, and you mentioned that 2 of those were going to be for Metro access. Are they all for Metro access, or is just the pink is loading and unloading, and those 2 on that one particular slide are the only ones for Metro access? Can you just kind of clarify that?
Yeah, the pink areas that you see on the plans are loading zones. Again, we haven't determined exactly like when they would operate, like what hours they would operate, if they'd be 24/7 or just in the mornings or just the evenings, or exactly where they'd be located, but they would be generally like loading zones. And so they would say no parking, loading only, something along those lines. The area at the very north end of Fenton Street, just south of Cameron Street, those areas would be designated for Metro access or other paratransit only. So they would not be used for, we don't intend them to be used for loading for like UPS or FedEx, but for Metro access vehicles or other private paratransit type users. And you muted yourself, so if you have an additional question or comment, keep your hand up, but if not, lower your hand. I'll just give you a second to let me know if you're keeping your hand up. So I'm going to unmute you and see if you have. No, you lowered your hand. Okay, great. All right, Rush Seal, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself.
Yes, hi. Have a multi-part. I'll try to keep it fairly brief and have some concerns. One quick question is, would it still be no turn on red for the length of Fenton as it currently is for those intersections?
That's correct. We would maintain the no turn on red restrictions throughout the Fenton Street corridor.
Okay. I mean, because part of my concern is that, and I drive and also walk with my kids on Fenton every day, and the concern is that with the taking away of turn lanes at the same time that a new daycare is opening up, that's going to be adding on traffic and potentially other multifamily additions that are going to be added on traffic, that the traffic situation is going to be much, much worse. And then those traffic is going to go into the neighborhoods. One other thing is that I know the Fenton Street Village parking garage is currently in the process of raising their rates, and also that not all the levels of that garage are open. So while you're taking away spots on Fenton, are you planning to do anything in terms of opening up more of that garage or doing something with the parking rates for that garage?
Yeah, those are good questions, Rush. So let me start at the big. You start with your first question, which was related to the turning restrictions and additional traffic. We did do a traffic study. I've talked about it at previous meetings. So if you want to go back and look at the recordings of the presentations from our previous meetings, we did talk about that. But the study does not anticipate major increases in travel time. I think we were looking at about 30 additional seconds. I think the study said about 36 additional seconds to drive the entire length of the corridor at rush hour. So right now it takes you about 4 minutes to go from Gist Avenue to Cameron Street at rush hour, roughly, and it would add about 30 seconds to that. In terms of diverting traffic into the neighborhood, that is something that we don't want to have happen, and that's one of the reasons that we have worked with the East Silver Spring neighborhood on the Grove Street neighborhood greenway to try and look at what we could do to mitigate those impacts. So we have that pilot project is currently in the stage 1 phase, and we've installed the treatments. We've installed a pedestrian walking space along Grove Street, and we're going to monitor what the traffic volumes and speeds are like on Grove Street during this pilot phase, so we can learn what we can do to help continue to mitigate those impacts. So we don't want that to happen, but we do know that the traffic is probably going to be a little bit worse along Fenton Street. Another thing that's going to impact traffic is the Purple Line, which our study does take into consideration as well. But the Purple Line is going to increase the signal phasing, the number of signal phases at this intersection of Fenton and Wayne, and that is going to make that intersection work a little bit less well than it does today. But that's what we're trying to provide, is a way for people to avoid that traffic by biking and walking in safe and comfortable, low stress environment. But we don't want to shift traffic into the neighborhood. So we are going to work with East Silver Spring and monitor the Grove Street neighborhood greenway to make sure that things are working well, and if we need to make changes, we will. Your second question was related to parking rates and parking availability in Garage 4, which is the garage that's south of Silver Spring Avenue, on the west side of Fenton Street. My understanding is the reason that part of Garage 4 is closed is due to structural capacity issues. So I don't think we're going to be opening any more spaces, but that would be a question for our parking team. However, the long-term plan is to redevelop the Garage 4 site into an underground garage with additional development in the area. And we could incorporate additional spaces as part of that project. And I think the idea is that eventually any lost spaces along Fenton Street would get added into that garage as redevelopment, and potentially any of the spaces that are currently closed off. We haven't gotten to that point yet in the design phase, but the idea is that the new Garage 4 would have more capacity than the current Garage 4. But the idea is that we really want to try and make Fenton Street work, the on-street spaces there for shorter term trips, for people who are kind of running in really briefly, and to have those longer term spaces in our garages and off of Fenton Street. Did you have another question, or?
No, I mean, and just the thing that I think I mentioned before, which is that I think that the Grove work of having the space for pedestrians and bikes on Grove is good, and I feel that having a street directly parallel to Grove with also a bike lane is duplicating some of those efforts, since they're directly next to each other. So that's just my comment. All
right, thanks. If you don't mind muting yourself and lowering your hand, I'm going to call on Zachary Weinstein. I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself, Zachary. So you should be able to unmute yourself and speak when you're ready.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
I was hoping you could go into more detail about the block that includes Safeway. Will drivers still be able to enter and exit the Safeway parking garage from Fenton Street?
Yes, the plan is to still allow both right and left turns from Fenton Street into the Safeway garage, but there will be a raised driveway apron there, so there'll be a bump that you'll have to kind of go up on as you turn in, which should slow down those turning vehicles. I know that's basically what we're proposing, but if you have any other thoughts about that, please make sure you submit those to us so we can get a record of that.
Yeah, I would strongly encourage you to close that entrance exit entirely. I think it's already dangerous now, and I think that it would, if drivers could just enter and exit from Thayer, that would be great.
Okay, thank you for that comment. If you don't mind muting yourself and lowering your hand. All right, Christopher Meyer, I am going to ask you to unmute yourself.
Yeah, hello. So I just want to say 2 thumbs up to the stormwater management. I think it's really great how you're working that into the medians and the buffers. I know you have done some of that on Arcola Avenue, and it looks really good. The shots that you showed from California look even better. So I'm very, very much looking forward to that. The one aspect that I'm really not looking forward to is the spot right in front of LaSac, where you have parking. I see again here where this is on slide 34, where the bike lane goes behind the parking row. And, so in this case, there's also an access point at Ripley to access that parking. So, if a car is coming, which way? To the right of the screen, making a left, I think they'll probably, the bikes will be behind the cars. And so what ends up happening is the bikers are blind to the cars and turn right into it. So it becomes a very dangerous location. So this is the case on Cedar Avenue or Spring Street, where these are happening. So I would be, in those cases, I would ride in the traffic preferentially, because it's more dangerous to bike in the bike lane. So that's one area that, if at all possible, if you're going to add on-street parking, I would even put the bike lane outside of the parking. I'd rather deal with the cars than the blind spot.
That's a great comment, Christopher. And we can look at daylighting that, maybe removing one of those parking spaces and putting an island there or something to improve visibility. That's a good comment. We can look into that. In terms of the stormwater, one thing that I forgot to mention during the presentation is that we do have a lot of utility congestion in downtown Silver Spring. So we are going to try and incorporate stormwater as much as possible, but there may be some areas where it's just not possible because of underground utilities. But thank you for those kudos. We really do want to make this as environmentally friendly as possible in terms of stormwater. We can't fix all the mistakes of the past in terms of not dealing with stormwater, but we're going to try and deal with as much of it as we can as part of this project. Brett Roulier, I'm asking you to unmute yourself. You should be able to speak. Go ahead, Brett. We can't hear you.
This is Brett Roulier.
Yep, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
I have 5 comments I'd like to make. One is, if you could try to expand the pedestrian accessible route to 6 feet, a minimum of 6 feet whenever you can, it would sure be appreciated. I note one example at Burlington and Fenton, where you're really reconfiguring Burlington, and as it extends west, you maintain a 5-foot wide width when there's actually plenty of room to expand it to 6 feet. My second comment is, I think it's great that you're looking at these new technologies and applications to apply to this, to Fenton Street. I think it's an excellent opportunity to do this. But I want to remind you that you need to look at the traffic control laws to make sure they support these new technologies. For example, you're putting in bike signals, and I want to make sure that once these bike signals are put in, they're very important, and that they're actually enforceable, and the bicyclists can be ticketed, cited for violating, like the traffic lights when they're installed. That's been a problem at other locations. I hope you're working with the adjacent businesses because they need to bring their entrances into ADA compliance. Many of the entrances are not in compliance already. One example is where you're expanding the right-of-way in front of 8120 Fenton, and they have steps, and a retaining wall, which makes access very, very difficult. And you're going to be taking over a lot of that property. So now would be the time to work with the property owner to figure out how he can bring his entrance into compliance. Another point I like to make is I think you need to be working more closely with the Purple Line Consortium. So I see we're at Wayne and Fenton. You have a significant reconfiguration going on, and the Purple Line is going to be required to install detectable warnings to protect the pedestrians from crossing the tracks. And all your changes are really complicating their ability to be able to do that. So now is the time to work with them to try and come up with a compromise where they can meet their ADA requirements as well as you. And finally, I'd like to at least get a report on the amount of on-street parking spaces there are now and how many that you propose will be on the south portion of the cycleway. That's it. That's all I want to say.
Okay, thank you, Brett. I don't have the number in front of me for the number of parking spaces that there would be, but we can certainly get that number for you. I just don't have it right in front of me right now. But those are all great comments. In terms of accessibility, we are very cognizant of the need to improve accessibility for people with disabilities throughout Silver Spring and throughout the county, and we are really trying to make this project as much about improving accessibility as it is about providing bike lanes. So wherever it's possible for us to improve accessibility, we are trying to do that as part of this project. So those are all really great points, and we are working with the Purple Line team. We're not proposing to change the curb locations in that area. So all the warning services the Purple Line would add would still be, we would not affect those. We wouldn't impact those at all, but we are working with them on a lot of things. So thank you for those comments. And I'm going to go ahead and lower your hand if you don't mind. And Carolyn Lampila, I'm asking you to unmute yourself, Carolyn.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for this presentation, the work on this. I'm really looking forward to a lot of the traffic calming measures that you've mentioned, and increasing safety for cyclists and pedestrians and people using transit. One thing, Fenton Street can be really challenging and unsafe to cross in many locations. I know you got some of this earlier. And usually you typically have to wait, over 2 minutes between the opportunities to cross Fenton Street. And then, it's a really quick, under 20 seconds, 15, 20 seconds opportunity, time to cross. And pedestrians and cyclists are competing with cars turning onto the street. I was wondering if this, and I know earlier you mentioned the left, signals for when vehicles can turn left, which is great. I was wondering if the cross signals will be lengthened to cross Fenton Street, and if that is something that can happen quicker than this plan over the next few years. And that's it. And thank you again.
Yeah, thank you, Carolyn. The signal timing is something that generally happens much later in the process than we are right now. And of course, you're right that we can make signal changes independently of this project. The main reason that the signals are what they are is because they're timed to fit in with other signals. They're on the same cycle length as other signals in the area generally, so that traffic flows. So it can be quite complicated to retime signals. I'm not trying to pass the buck. Timing signals is not my job, but we can certainly work with our signals team to understand whether some changes to those signals might be helpful. But giving more time or shortening the length of time between the cycles could make traffic a little bit worse on Fenton Street, which is not necessarily a bad thing if we're talking about improving mobility. But it's a complicated equation, and we want to make sure that everything is thought through as part of that. But we have not yet gotten to the signal timing element as part of this level of design. That will happen later on in the design process. But thank you for that comment. Clark Larson, I'm asking you to unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Matt, for the great presentation. Can't wait to ride this corridor in a couple years. I ride it now, but maybe not as comfortably. I'm wondering what you thought about for the Fenton and Ellsworth area. I think for the first commenter talked about shenanigans. Anecdotally, I think it's a lot of people waiting to pick up food, maybe Uber Eats or DoorDash kind of things. And I know that you can't control who parks on the right of way. It's kind of squeezing a bubble. But I'm wondering if you thought about, in these busier retail, maybe eatery places, finding locations, designated locations to accommodate them to just kind of as they wait to pick up deliveries? Or is that something that's maybe a broader discussion in the entire Silver Spring area? Thanks.
Yeah, Clark, that's a great question. And the idea is that we are trying to provide loading zones to provide places for people to wait. We, of course, can't force them to use them to some degree, especially if people are in their vehicle waiting. So that's something that we're going to have to work on some more. And that's not just a Silver Spring or not just a Fenton Street problem, but an issue throughout the county and really throughout urban areas all across the United States. And this is something that's constantly changing. I think, 5 or 6 years ago, this didn't happen. We didn't have Uber Eats and DoorDash. And who knows where things are going in the future. It's really hard to predict things when with these new technologies that are kind of popping up and sort of changing the equation as it were. So that's something we're going to continue to monitor, and we will work with our parking enforcement team once this facility opens. But yeah, that's a great point, and we can certainly look at where else we can provide maybe some additional loading zones in that area. But that's a challenging area because people want to be right by the business, especially if they're a DoorDash or an Uber Eat type driver. So Jamie Ware, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself, Jamie.
Hey Matt, thank you for the presentation, and I love all the ideas and how it's supporting Vision Zero in the future. I had just a quick question. Not sure if you can answer it, but I figure I have the time to ask it. As we move toward a more of a focus on walking and biking and kind of slowing down the speed of the streets, would car-oriented businesses like Greyhound and 7-Eleven be encouraged to move, if that's a possibility? And that's my question. Thank you.
Well, that is certainly beyond my scope of work. We're not going to encourage businesses to leave. However, there are, as social redevelops, it may redevelop away from those sorts of businesses naturally. I don't know, but we're not going to force 7-Eleven or Greyhound to leave. But I think the engine for that to happen over time is redevelopment. And there is a master plan that's currently being amended. We do have some people from Park and Planning here tonight. I'm not going to put them on the spot, but that's the sort of thing that happens at a much higher level than at an individual project design. So no, we're not gonna ask Greyhound or 7-Eleven to leave. We're going to work with what's there and assume that it's going to stay there. If it changes, we'll deal with it when it changes, and hopefully can use any kind of redevelopment opportunities when those happen to improve things. That's one of the things that typically happens in the redevelopment process is we can get new or better facilities out of things. So for example, if a site redevelops, maybe they move the bike lane back a little bit or create a wider buffer or plant some new street trees or widen the sidewalk or things like that can happen through the redevelopment process. But we're not going to force a business out as part of this project. Next up, we have Beth Ann Kyle. I'm asking you to unmute yourself.
Hello, I have a couple of comments about an earlier commenter was talking about bike lanes on Grove. I just want to point out there are no bike lanes on Grove. There's a pedestrian lane, but bikes are actually in the roadway. So if he's talking about having a bike lane on Grove and one on Fenton, that doesn't exist. And in fact, it's sometimes hard to get the pedestrians into the pedestrian lane. So sometimes Grove is actually more crowded now because of the loss of the pedestrian lane, which I'm not complaining that we shouldn't have those, but I just wanted to point out there is no bike lane on Grove. I also agree with the comment about making a turn around parked cars. That is actually quite awkward, and I do the same. I just don't go in the bike lane if I need to turn. So that's, I think if that could be addressed, that would be great. I'm also wondering about the bike signals, as I'm somebody who regularly rides my bike down Fenton, and usually if there's a tension between the amount of time for a car versus a bike, bikes get the short end of the stick. So if there's now a left turn signal at every block between Philadelphia and Wayne, if those are going to be timed disadvantageously to bikes, that's going to ruin the whole point of the bike lane. So I'd be curious to see if there are studies about bike signals, because I find the places that I've seen them, most people just completely ignore them. And then finally, I counted the parking spots on Fenton yesterday, and at least on the west side, there were, I think, 28 between Wayne and Philadelphia.
Yeah, we have those numbers in our report. I didn't have them right in front of me, but yes, we can get those numbers. I just don't have them in front of me right now. In terms of the bike signals, that's a great question. I didn't want to go into too much detail in the presentation because I wanted to make sure we had enough time for comments, but I can give you some more detail now. One of the reasons that bike signals are not used more extensively in the United States right now is because of the interim approval that Federal Highway issued, which makes them very difficult to use because you can only display a green bike indication if there's no conflicting traffic, which basically means you have to have arrow signals for the right turns, arrow signals for the left turns, and then you have very limited amount of time left for bicyclists, which is exactly what you were describing. That's why we're asking for a request to experiment. And what we're proposing on the Fenton Street corridor is that there would be about 7 seconds when the bike signal is green and the walk signal is on and all of the traffic faces a red signal. So an exclusive 7 seconds for pedestrians and cyclists to cross over the side streets. And at the end of that 7 seconds, the bike signal would stop being green and it would start being flashing yellow, so that bikes would continue to be able to proceed whenever southbound Fenton Street traffic has a green signal. But we have to use flashing yellow because right turns would be able to turn across the bike path. Left turns would not be able to turn across the bike path during the flashing yellow phase, only right turns. And we don't have room for right turn lanes, so we can't have a right turn arrow signal other than at Philadelphia Avenue. That's the only place where we have enough room for that right turn lane. So essentially what that would mean is if you're a cyclist, you get 7 seconds where you don't have to worry about people turning. And then you have the remainder of the time when Fenton Street has a green signal for southbound traffic. So you would still have plenty of time to cross because we're going to have plenty of time for southbound drivers to go through the intersection. So we think that it will work well for cyclists, but that is something that we're going to have to get approved by Federal Highway and State Highway. Now, there are similar treatments that are being used in other parts of the United States that are operating under what's called a request to experiment, and they have been working well. So we don't anticipate any issues on the Federal Highway side, although you never know. But State Highway, we do have to get approval from State Highway, and this will be the first kind of treatment like this State Highway Administration has administered. So this would be something that it may cause some challenges for getting approval, but that's what we're going with. If we can't get that approval, the plan would be to use pedestrian signals and just have a sign that says bikes use pedestrian signal, in which case you would have the same amount of time as the pedestrians have to cross over the side streets, plus, well, and that would include that 7 second leading pedestrian interval, plus the remaining time that pedestrians have during that green phase. You just wouldn't have a bike signal to use. So that's what we're doing. We are working. We've already had conversations with the state and with Federal Highway, and we're looking forward to having another meeting about that in the near future once we can get everyone's schedules to align. That's always fun when you're trying to have like 4 agencies all have a meeting at the same time. It's always hard to get everyone's calendar aligned. Martin Posthumus, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. I really can't wait to see this on the ground and be able to use it myself. I've just got one question specifically about the 410 Fenton redesign. And just looking at the map in the presentation and on the website, I'm trying to figure out what the designed expectation is for a cyclist who is heading eastbound on Burlington to turn onto Fenton northbound, because it doesn't look like there's a turn box, and it also doesn't look like there's much space to realign with traffic. So is the expectation that they would switch onto the sidewalk here, or what?
Yeah, that's a great question, Martin. We are anticipating that they would use a turn box potentially. I think we still need to get into fine grained detail there and figure out exactly how much space we have. But yeah, it is really tight, and we don't have a lot of right of way in that area. So yeah, we'll work on that. That's a great question. It's a little challenging because that's where the cycle track is transitioning onto a shared use path going further south, because we don't have enough width in the right of way to have separate facilities. But we'll work on that. That's a great point. So thank you for pointing that out. All right, Aditya Inamar, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself. Go ahead.
Hey, Matt, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Thanks, Matt, for the presentation. Thank you, Matt, for the presentation. Looking forward to this project. I had a question about the 3-inch intermediate level cycle track in the context of drainage and curbs. My question kind of is, are you maintaining existing curbs, or are they going to be replaced with new curbs? And same with the inlets, like is the inlet and the flow line going to move since it's going to be a little raised? And basically, you know, if the inlets are going to be at the new curb location between the barriers of the travel lane and the cycle track?
That's a great and very detailed question. And I'm going to ask Steve Zender from our consultant team to weigh in on this, but generally, yes, we are going to have to move some of the inlet structures, but that's less of a function of the bike lane being 3 inches higher as it is that we have the bump outs that were installed around 2002, I believe, as part of the last streetscape project. But in general, the curb will have to get reconstructed, but in general, the curb is not going to move from where it is now for the most part. Steve, do you want to give a more detailed answer there? Looking for Steve, my consultant. Did we lose Steve? I don't see Steve on the list anymore. Hold on a minute. It looks like we might have lost Steve, so I apologize.
That's okay. I can follow up with you later. That's fine.
Okay, thanks.
I can answer for Steve. So the new drainage structures will be in that median space in between the bike lane and the roadway, and it'll have a trough on both sides where water will drain from both the bike lanes and into the roadway side into this new new drainage structure. And it's basically to improve drainage and simplify the way that we're going to deal with stormwater in the on the corridor.
Great, thanks, Dave. And next up we have Christopher Meyer. I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself, Christopher.
Hi, thanks for taking my comment again. So the discussion about Grove, I think, brought up some thoughts, which is that, in my opinion, I think of Fenton as a place where you would want people to hang out, buy things, eat, shop, and so on, and less so like travel through. So I guess my comment is, or maybe the consideration would be, if you could build a throughway for cyclists on Georgia Avenue, so that you can move from at high speed north to south through that corridor. And so all the work on Fenton then would be slow speed moving, just going to that final step to your destination, which also brings up, I think, my last point, which is I didn't see anything about bike parking, but I've seen also, creative use of on-street bike parking in the bikeway in other towns. So I was curious what thoughts you've given to bike parking provisions.
Yeah, thank you, Christopher. Those are good points. In terms of bike parking, we are going to make sure that we incorporate additional bike parking as much as possible with this project. So that would be included in the project. So we do have limited space, of course, but since there's a lot of trade-offs, but the idea is the furniture zone, the space between the bike lane and the sidewalk, is one place we can put bike parking. We may also have some places where the bikeway barrier, the barrier between the median between the bikeway and the roadway may have space that's available for bike parking. It's generally not very wide on Fenton Street, so that's probably not going to be a very consistent option, but we may have places for it in some locations. In terms of having a bike lane on Georgia Avenue, that's kind of that would be a different project. I think that there is a need for a bike facility on Fenton Street. This connects to the Metropolitan Branch Trail, and people do need to get to businesses in downtown Silver Spring. So Fenton Village is a place that people want to go to, and that includes people who are using bicycles. The Bicycle Master Plan and the Silver Spring Master Plan call for bike facilities on Fenton Street, and my job as a project manager is not to determine where to build bike lanes, but to build the ones that have already been determined to be built. So your comment about putting a bike lane on Georgia Avenue, I would direct you to the planning staff, some of whom are on this call, and encourage them, if that's what you're feeling, that encourage them to add that to their master plan. But that we still, I think, that if we were to build a bike lane on Georgia Avenue, it would be a complement to, not a substitute for, a bike lane on Fenton Street. So I just want to take a moment to, we have 3 hands that are raised. I don't know, Angel, if we had any chats that came in that need to be brought up. So Angel, do we have any chats?
Yes, there are a couple that you end up answering them already. I have 2 more actually.
Okay.
So the first one is, why are you taking away the Philadelphia Avenue stop? Just as not a signalized intersection.
I'm sorry, what was that? Could you repeat that question, Angel?
Yes. So the question is, why are you taking away the Philadelphia Avenue stop? I mean, and I'm assuming it's the bus stop.
Oh, the bus stop.
Yeah, just as not a signalized intersection.
Yeah, so there's currently a ride-on bus stop it's essentially at Richmond Avenue. It's not really at Philadelphia Avenue, but the main reason for relocating that stop to just Avenue and merging it with the Sligo Avenue stop is because there's a very large scarlet oak in Fenton Street Urban Park that is right behind the sidewalk. And I think that tree is probably about 70 years old or so. And if we were to install a floating bus stop in this location, we would need to move the sidewalk back away from the roadway. And that would mean removing that very large tree in the park. So we've been working with the Parks Department and Ride On and WMATA, and everyone felt that saving that tree was really important, and that moving the stop a very, very short block away to just Avenue would not negatively impact transit users significantly. We did look at putting the bus stop on Philadelphia Avenue after this for the F4, after the bus turns onto Philadelphia Avenue. But WMATA was concerned that if the bus turned left from Fenton Street onto Philadelphia Avenue and then immediately stopped to pick up or discharge passengers, that the drivers behind the bus would rear end the bus because they wouldn't expect the bus to stop immediately after turning left. So WMATA did not want to put the stop in right after that. And so that meant that we needed to move the stop further up the route as opposed to further down the route. So that's why that was decided to do that. We really don't, we want to try and avoid cutting down trees whenever possible. And we especially want to avoid cutting down big signature trees like that scarlet oak. And I know we have Jackie Hoban from Parks here who would very much not like it if we cut that tree down. So along with a lot of people in the community, I'm sure. So that's the main reason for that. What's your other question, Angel?
Yes, the other question is there a plan to reopen Ellsworth Drive between Fenton and Georgia to vehicular traffic?
So Ellsworth Drive between Fenton Street and Georgia Avenue is not a county road anymore. It's largely controlled by, and there are, I think, a few pieces of it that are still owned by the county, but most of it is a privately owned street. And so we don't control whether it's open or not. And in fact, the downtown Silver Spring developer who owns it recently applied to the planning department, and I believe was approved at the planning staff level. And someone from planning could maybe come in and help me out with this. I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you're able to answer that question, but to actually make it an AstroTurf space instead of a paved street. So I don't know that they have any anticipation of it reopening to cars, but we don't control that is essentially the short answer to that. So I don't see anyone from planning unmuting themselves. So I think that
Hey, Matt, sorry.
It's Katie.
Yeah, I was just listening to you. Correct. So they've applied for, they being the applicant and the owner, has applied to make it such that you can't use cars on it. So exactly as you're saying, we're moving more towards making it bike and pedestrian predominant and prioritized rather than opening it back up to cars. It was open to cars for the delivery during the pandemic, and that was meant to be a temporary condition. Does that answer your question?
Well, it's Angel was reading a question that was chatted, but hopefully it answers.
Well, sure.
I think that's good.
Cheers. Cheers to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Angel, any more questions or no?
That's it for now.
Okay, thank you, Angel. All right, we have 3 hands up. I'm going to call on them, but if you have a question or a comment and you haven't raised your hand, now's a good time to get in line and ask those questions. I'm not going to force everyone to stay until 9 if we don't have questions that go that long. So if we finish early, we finish early. But if you have any questions, now's a good time to raise your hand. So Peter Gray, you're next. I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself.
So my question is, are there going to be any leading pedestrian intervals at any of the intersections with the lights?
We haven't gotten to that level of design yet, but our anticipation is that definitely for the pedestrians who are on Fenton Street crossing the side streets, that they would have leading pedestrian intervals. I think we already may have leading pedestrian intervals at least some of these side street crossings over Fenton Street, but yes, our anticipation is that we would have LTIs, leading pedestrian intervals at as many of these signals as possible, and definitely for the ones if you're on Fenton crossing over the side streets. All right, Eric Brenner, and just actually, I'm going to call you just Eric, but just to make sure that we're all on the same page and everyone understands the lingo, a leading pedestrian interval is where the walk sign comes on before the adjacent green traffic signal comes on. So it gives pedestrians a head start into the intersection, and it has been proven to reduce pedestrian crashes because drivers the pedestrians are already established before drivers start trying to get into the intersections. Without an LPI, when the light turns green, the drivers can oftentimes shoehorn their way in to make right and left turns before pedestrians even have a chance to step off the sidewalk into the crosswalk. So that's what an LPI is, in case we weren't familiar. And we are planning to incorporate those as much as possible. Eric Brenner, I'm asking you to unmute yourself.
My comments related to what you just talked about with Ellsworth and the Peterson companies. I would hope they're paying careful attention to this, because as soon as the new project opens, having a block that with no cars will just encourage so many bikes to flow through there to Georgia and the Wayne Avenue cycle track, that I'd hope they're somehow looking to incorporate that in, not just to the AstroTurf plan, but also as a way to entice customers to the tenants that they have with the restaurants. And it also would be an ideal location for a secure bike parking facility. So while I realize it's not the scope of your project, it just seems like a real win-win for them to be working with you as the years poke along. This isn't going to be happening in the next few months. So I'd hope they'd continue to warm up to what you're doing, as it's going to be a big asset to them.
All right, thank you, Eric. That's a great comment. And certainly if you want to reach out to them or to planning staff, that can never hurt to tell people how you feel. So, we're going to operate under the assumption that the designs, if you look at our plans, we're operating under the assumption that the road is going to remain in place, because until they actually make the change, we don't know that the change is going to happen. Sometimes applicants apply for changes, for site plan changes, and then never actually act on them. So we're operating under the assumption that the road is still going to stay there. It may be closed to traffic, but we're going to operate under the assumption that the road is going to stay there until we find out that it isn't going to stay there, and then we can modify our plans based on that. But right now, our plans allow the road to stay open if the applicant, the owner of the street, keeps it open. But it will have the protections that we described before in terms of like the slowing turns and things like that. So David Helms, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself, David.
Hey, Matt, good job. Thanks for the brief. I guess I'm the last guy other than Jonathan. Just to say, Fenton's the best north-south route through Silver Spring for a lot of different reasons you mentioned, for access to the commercial establishments, for just getting through. And downtown Silver Spring, I mean, I come up Ellsworth and hit Fenton, and then to get over to East-West Highway and points south. And I think the number one node pair for capital bike share in the county is between Veterans Plaza and the community college. So let's not forget that, we have kind of a college down there that is a significant campus that needs support. And certainly Georgia Avenue is a arterial, it's a dangerous road, it's a fast road, and high-speed turns there that is just not suitable for, if through traffic, let alone trying to get commercial access. So definitely Fenton's the one, the best, sweetest, sweet spot, and it fits right into the existing bicycling facilities in the long range plan. So I really appreciate that we're doing this, that we're moving forward, and just to kind of touch on Zach's point about probably the greatest amount of turns outside of an intersection is going to be in the Safeway. And so if I had one kind of concern on the whole route, it would be the conflicts going in and out. And then I think people coming out of like a cave, if you will, parking garage, I think there's, drivers may or may not be looking for cyclists there. So that, if there's a way of prioritizing their access in lieu of Fenton, I definitely would concur with Zach on his comment there. So again, thanks so much, and let us know if there's anything we can do to kind of support this in the CIP funding. Thanks.
All right, thank you, David. Yeah, we can certainly continue our conversations. We have talked to Safeway already about especially about their loading needs. One of the challenges is we really can't close that entrance because they need that entrance for their trucks. That's where their loading dock is. So the big trucks that deliver to Safeway come in through that Fenton Street side, and they're going to have to come in through that Fenton Street side because of the design of that parking garage. So, even if we were able to close it to passenger cars somehow, they would still need that opening for the big trucks that come in. So that's an unfortunate thing that we have to live with because of design decisions that were made, 30 or 40 years ago. But if the Safeway ever redevelops, we can certainly look at having their access be different from what it is now. And I'm not saying that there is any proposal to redevelop the Safeway. I'm just saying that if that ever happens, that could be an opportunity to rethink how that access works. Jonathan Bernstein, we have two hands up, Jonathan Bernstein and Francie Gilman. If you have any questions or comments that you haven't made, or if you want to make another comment, just go ahead and put your hand up now so we can call on you. Jonathan Bernstein, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself now.
Thanks, Matt. So first, it's a great plan. I'm really excited by it. One quickly follow on to what David was just talking about in your response is please take seriously the need to really well sign that entrance from all sides to avoid problems. But very quickly, I wanted to ask, did you say, when are the two Hawk Signal intersections on Fenton going to go live? Do you know that?
I don't know the answer to that. And I'm not working on that project. That's our traffic team. But I believe the holdup, and this is generally the case when we install new signals, is we control the signal equipment, but we don't control the power. So I believe what we're waiting on is for PEPCO to turn the power on. I could be wrong about that, but that's my assumption, is that we're waiting on PEPCO. So I don't know if we have an answer on that, and I don't think we have anyone from traffic here tonight, so I can't give you a better answer than that. But hopefully it's soon. The equipment's all there, so hopefully that will be soon. So
Geez, another thing that depends on PEPCO. Okay. The other thing was, have you been able to make progress on putting small bike parking along Fenton? Because that's the best way to persuade the businesses that business will come to them from cyclists and not just cars.
Yeah, we have installed bike racks on Fenton Street. Actually, that was something that I did a long time ago. When I first started, I was installing bike racks, and I don't do bike racks anymore. But we have installed some bike racks along Fenton Street. We're certainly happy to try and install more if we can find some space for them. We do generally buy a couple dozen bike racks a year for installation around the county. So that's something that we can certainly work on looking at going forward. And if you have specific locations that you think we need to have some more bike racks, shoot me an email and we'll see if we can't find a way to make it happen.
I'll certainly do that. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Jonathan. All right, last hand up is Francie Gilman. I'm asking you to unmute yourself, Francie. Go ahead.
Hi, thanks, Matt. That's a whirlwind presentation. Thank you very much. I'm going to have to go back and study, but two questions come to mind. One is, how is your team coordinating and planning with the pedestrian master plan? I don't think that's going to be out for another year, but when their findings come out, do you think that you're going to have to retrofit or refit some of what you've got going there? And the second question is the possibility of a design, the design testing and training facility that was mentioned in the toolkit for streets to be safer and more accessible for people with vision. Just wondering, you know, that's a wonderful idea. Hope it can happen.
Yeah, thank you, Francie. Those are great questions. I'm going to answer your second question first, and then come back to the first one. So the second, and just give people some context. So Francie mentioned the testing and training facility, which is a recommendation that came out of that low vision study that I mentioned during the presentation. And the idea is that we build a mock-up essentially of some intersection types, maybe a floating bus stop or things like that. We build a mock-up using cheap materials like plywood, that we can sort of modify and we can test out without spending a whole bunch of money, and we can bring people out from different groups to test it out and see how well it actually works before we go out and put it in the real world. We have identified 2 pilot intersections in Silver Spring that we are, I'm hopeful we can get into construction next year. Unfortunately, procurement of the design contractor took a little bit longer than we anticipated, but we're working on getting them on board right now. But the idea is we're going to build a mock-up sometime in early 2022, in the first half of 2022, of a pilot intersection. We're going to test it out, and then we're going to reconstruct those intersections to include those features and see how well they work in using the permanent materials and in real life. You know, how do they hold up under snow and being driven on, things like that. And we will use the findings from that sometime in 2022 to start incorporating those into other intersections going forward. Hopefully, that'll allow us to get some of those treatments into Fenton Street, but certainly if we can't get into Fenton, into intersections after Fenton as we go forward. But yeah, that's the plan, is to try and work through those things over the next year or so. The second question was, how are we coordinating with the pedestrian plan? We have extensive coordination with the planning staff, and we have planning staff who are here today. I think generally speaking, the pedestrian plan I don't think we're going to do anything that's going to run afoul of the pedestrian plan, because we're keeping sidewalks, we're widening sidewalks, we're improving accessibility, and the pedestrian plan is not going to get down into the fine grained level of detail that we're talking about. But I don't want to put words in the planning department's mouth, so we have a couple people from planning. David Anspacher, I don't know if you mind trying to answer Francie's question at all.
Yeah, hi, this is Dave Anspacher. So I supervise the multimodal transportation planning team, and Eli Glazier, who's on paternity leave right now, is leading that plan. And I think, Matt, you hit everything quite exactly. I don't see anything in this plan that is going to run afoul, as Matt said, of the pedestrian master plan. And it is a higher level policy document than a block by block planning effort, as Matt said.
Thank you, Dave. And Francie, you still have your hand up. I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself just to make sure you don't have any follow-up to that.
No, I'll get in touch with you if I do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Francie. All right, with that, we don't have any more hands up.
I have another question that came in.
Yep.
Okay, so this question is about signal timing. I realize that signal timing is premature for this conversation, but I have wondered about a pedestrian scramble at Fenton and Wayne because it is such a high pedestrian use mixed with many turning vehicles. Are there any examples of pedestrian scrambles in Montgomery County?
Okay, that's a great question. And before I answer it, I just want to give some context. There's kind of 2 different things that you might be referring to. The first is what you would call a scramble. It's also known as a barn stance. And that is where pedestrians can cross parallel to traffic or diagonally, and they can go in any direction all at the same time. There are not any official ones of those in Montgomery County. There is, I believe, 2 of them in DC at 14th and Irving in Columbia Heights, and at 7th and H in Chinatown. Again, those are where you can cross parallel to traffic or diagonal all at the same time. And sometimes in those intersections, you can only cross during that all pedestrian phase, that scramble phase. And sometimes you can still cross parallel to traffic when traffic has the green signal, but it kind of varies. The other kind is just an all pedestrian phase where you don't actually have a diagonal crossing, but all the walk signs are on. And I know that sounds like, well, if all the walk signs are on, why can't they cross diagonally? It sounds like a distinction without a difference. But the main difference is we have to time, under federal rules, we have to time signals based on a certain crossing speed. We assume a pedestrian has a certain crossing speed, which is 3.5 feet per second. And if you remember your high school geometry, the hypotenuse, the diagonal on a triangle, is longer than any of the other legs. And so the diagonal crossing is longer than any of the parallel legs. And so what that means is it increases the amount of time we have to have the walk sign on. And also, if we do a diagonal crossing, we have to install a pedestrian ramp for it. We have to have a diagonal ramp so that a person in a wheelchair also is permitted to cross diagonally. So we do have an all pedestrian crossing in Montgomery County at Bethesda and Arlington in downtown Bethesda. Officially, it's not a diagonal crossing because we don't have diagonal ramps or diagonal facing pedestrian signal heads, and we didn't time it for diagonal crossing. However, because it's all pedestrian, if you were to cross diagonally, you could, but it's not officially one. So that's all to kind of set up the answer to this question. And for Fenton and Wayne, I certainly understand the want for that. The complicating factor is that there's going to be a light rail line that enters that intersection from one of the corners. It's not there now, but it is under construction and it will be there in the next couple of years. And so we don't have the ability to have people crossing diagonally because the southwest corner, we can't put a ramp there because there's light rail tracks that actually emerge into the intersection from that corner. So unfortunately, that's not really an option for that intersection. We've also heard a request for that. And we sort of have an all pedestrian phase at Fenton and Ellsworth right now. It's unofficial, but we have what's called split phasing at the intersection of Fenton and Ellsworth, so that when Ellsworth coming from the north, that's coming from the Civic Building going toward Georgia Avenue, has a green signal, but the walk signals are not on. But when Ellsworth Drive coming from downtown Silver Spring going north toward the Civic Building has a green signal, the pedestrian signals are on, but that street's closed. So it doesn't matter if the green signals are on because there's no one coming from it. So essentially, there's nobody coming. We don't signalize it as an all pedestrian crossing because we don't allow you to cross Ellsworth, but you could cross Ellsworth if you wanted to because there's no conflicting traffic, but it's not signalized that way. So all that's to say that is another intersection where we've heard requests for a diagonal crossing or a scramble there, but because of the accessibility issues that I described, we're shying away from that because people with vision disabilities have a really hard time finding the existing crossings because of the ambient noise level. And adding those diagonal crossings makes it even more complicated for them to find them. So we're trying to actually channelize pedestrians a little bit and guide them to the correct crossing location so that people with low vision are able to cross safely and easily there and without the stress of having to worry about, did I find the crossing? Am I hearing the correct audible signal? So it also complicates things when we have the cycletrack because pedestrians may want to cross the bikeway and not wait for the. I know that we've heard someone made a comment that cyclists don't obey the red signals. Well, we're actually more concerned, especially at that intersection, that pedestrians aren't going to obey the walk signal. They're going to walk out in front of cyclists who have a green bike signal to get to the medians because of the pedestrian volumes there. So it's really, those are both really complicated intersections, and we're not considering scrambles as part of that for those reasons. But we're certainly willing to consider them at other intersections in the county. And if you have, whoever that comment was, if you have questions or thoughts about that, please feel free to reach out to me directly. And with that, we have about 7 minutes left before 9 o'clock, which is when our captioner is going to leave. So this is the last call for any questions or comments. If you have any questions or comments, please raise your hand now. And I will, while we're waiting, I will remind everyone that the record is going to remain open through January 14th of next year, which is about 5 weeks away. So if you have any comments, please get those to me in writing. either email them or mail them to me before January 14th. We'll keep the record open that long. And I appreciate everyone's time tonight. We do have one more hand up, Karen Roper. I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself, Karen. Go ahead.
Hi, thanks, Matt. Since you have the time, I'm going to ask this question that may not be part of it, but I think it will exacerbate the problem. The block from Wayne to Bonifant backs up and gridlocks Bonifant every single day. Same with Wayne to Georgia. You can't cross without going between cars. You can't, with the purple line adding another cycle to the light, that's going to be worse. I'm just wondering if any of that is part of your traffic studies and what you're doing, or if there's anything aside from having a police officer or camera give tickets that can design-wise mitigate some of that.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Karen. And we always have time for you, Karen. And I think you were one of our last commenters at the last meeting. You're always saving your comments for the end. So, no, thank you for those comments. I think
people cover some of my questions. I don't want to read, you know.
Great. Well, yeah. So, well, thank you, Karen, and you've been involved from the very beginning. So we appreciate all the feedback you've given us over the years. I think that's a great point. Blocking the intersection is something that's going to be a challenge. We did consider the purple line as part of our traffic study. So the answer to that part of your question is yes, we did consider the purple line in our traffic study. That is incorporated. In terms of blocking the box, I think that may be a situation where we need to. We're going to have to look in operationally what we can do to prevent that from happening. There are some ways that we could potentially do that, like maybe phasing the signals so that the signal for at Bonifant for northbound traffic turns red before the signal up at Wayne, so that people kind of can't enter the intersection. We might need to have a police officer out there at certain hours, potentially. I don't know, because what we don't want to have happen is the traffic to back up on Bonifant and delay the purple line, right? That would kind of be a worst case scenario. So a lot of things to factor in. That's a great comment. We will look at that as we go forward, and we will reach out to our purple line partners as well and mention that to them. But I'm sure that they're also aware of the signal issues because they have their own traffic study as part of that. So did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen. If you don't mind muting yourself. Last call. Any more questions or comments? We have about 4 minutes left. I can let you go early. Give you 4 minutes of your life back. All right, well, I don't see any more hands, so I'm just going to say thank you so much for taking this evening and spending it with us. There's a lot you could be doing this evening, but coming to a community meeting and talking about bike lanes is something that we're always glad people are willing to do. And I look forward to seeing you all at our next community meeting, which will be sometime in the summer for 65% design. And I'm sure I'll also see some of you at the planning board hearing tentatively on January the 27th. So look forward to that. Please get your comments to me in writing by January the 14th and sooner if possible, but definitely by January the 14th. And I appreciate your time. And if you have any other questions or comments, please feel free to email me in the meantime.
Matt, I have one more.
One more, okay.
All right, give me 1 second. I need to scroll back up. So let me give you the context. So this is a tangent question about Grove Street. Are we on the list for sidewalk plowing when there is a huge snowstorm? Especially since that side of the street is now rezoned to commercial, or is it going to be rezoned to commercial soon? Will Fenton sidewalks be plowed?
Okay, so I'm not aware of any proposed rezonings. We do have the planning department staff here, and I don't think we have anyone from the Silver Spring team here, although we did invite them, but I think they weren't available tonight. But I don't know if anyone from planning can speak to any proposed rezoning, but I don't believe any part of Grove Street is proposed for rezoning to commercial. But in terms of sidewalk shoveling, I don't believe Grove is on our list of places to monitor. We can certainly, if we have any snow events, we can see how it works out. We're in a pilot phase right now for Grove Street, so we're monitoring it. We're going to see how it works. If we need to look into trying to get someone else to shovel it, we can certainly look at that if it becomes a problem. One of the things that our highway services people have mentioned is that the barrier is so low that if we do salt or brine Grove Street, that the sprayer will probably manage to get salt and brine into the walking area anyway, so it may not be a significant problem and it won't be compacted by people driving on it. So it may not be as big of an issue, but we're going to wait and see. That's a great comment. And with that, we're coming up on 9 o'clock. So have already closed, so I'll just say one more time, thank you everyone for attending. We are going to post this recording on our website within a few days. We do have to get it captioned, so make sure everything is accessible. Oh, I see Steve Aldrich has unmuted himself. Steve, did you want to answer that last question there?
No, I'm sorry, that was accidental.
Accidental, okay, I'm not going to put you on the spot then. With that, I'm going to end the meeting, but I want to thank everyone again for attending, and I will see you again at future meetings, hopefully in person at the next time. Hopefully we'll be able to have an in-person meeting sometime soon. So thank you very much, everyone. Have a good night and take care.